Hey everybody, and welcome to the Veterinary Optimist. Today, I'm here with Stephen Eidelman, the CEO of Modern Animal. Today, we really get to dig into what it is that Modern Animal is all about. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know what? I'm really excited for this conversation because part of my journey is trying to be present for the people in the clinic. And you run a company that have people in clinic. And so I think we fight the same battle, but for different reasons. And Stephen, I even hate sometimes saying the words like fight and using that kind of tone, but I think you probably know, and we will uncover from our conversation today, that there's a lot of things happening in the veterinary profession where we're really trying to do the right thing for our people. And it does feel almost like a battle at sometimes. So with that being said, I kind of would just really like to know what led you to start Modern Animal, because you were the mastermind behind that. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think the way this all came about was effectively starting to observe and take in what you were just describing. And the way I got there in the first place was somewhat of an accident. I started a company 14 years ago called Whistle in the pet space. And that was me as a young aspiring entrepreneur looking for a problem to solve and ultimately landing on an idea that was in search of a problem a little bit. But luckily landing in this industry, which there's a reason I'm still in, is because I fell in love with it. But along the way, had an opportunity to really see up close. We ended up selling that company to Mars right as they were starting to go a lot deeper into the veterinary space. So they understood it was a great industry. They had a meaningful exposure to it through some of their existing food brands, but also they had already bought PetSmart or Banfield from PetSmart, and they bought us as part of that strategy of going deeper into the veterinary space. And so I had an opportunity to see up close what was happening in the industry, because up until that point we were tapping on the door literally of veterinary practices, but we never really got inside the practice. And so once I was at Mars, I had a chance to see inside. And that was where what you just described, that fight that was happening, very much sort of quietly, very much without a lot of fanfare, with dozens of consolidators at that point buying up veterinary practices, and the frustration that the industry was experiencing even more sort of hidden. The thing that initially drew me in was just the obvious pain points that a pet owner faces, just as a pet owner, not being a veterinarian, not being a technician, not having worked a day in my life at that point in a practice. And I've not yet ever been paid to work a day in the practice. I probably never will, given my lack of skills there. But I think the obvious thing was really the pet owner is just left behind. I mean, think about all the other industries that we see where innovation has been pushing the experience forward. I mean, ultimately, what pain point can you solve for a customer is the question any good entrepreneur asks, and then they come up with a solution. And so for me, that was where it started. There were all these things that as a pet owner I would have wanted, and a lot of it was somehow tied in with technology, somehow tied in with accessibility, availability, telemedicine, virtual care, mobile apps, self-booking appointments, communication, improving communication, more transparency, a whole bunch of stuff like that. I mean, just the quality of the physical space. I was asking myself, why am I going into this beautiful coffee shop for a $4 coffee, and I'm going in and paying $400, if not $4,000 at the vet, and it's such an afterthought, the whole experience. That was the initial sort of hook. But when you start spending time with people in this industry, it's much deeper than that, right? And I think that was where you could sort of see where the train was going, and really the train wreck and whatever, the many car pileup that was sort of happening with the lack of focus on people. And that was really the big epiphany for me, was this is not a problem of the pet owner as much as we're just not meeting their expectations. But the thing that was really broken was the industry. I mean, the whole industry was broken, and all the incentives were in the wrong place. And that was where, in some sense, the veterinary industry is such a good business that it was attracting a lot of capital, but it was attracting capital that has really no interest in improving the overall state of affairs. It's just, the most cynical way to put it would be, just squeeze out as much profit as possible. But I think there's a lot of people who intended to sort of do a good job of taking these assets of veterinary clinics and shepherding them through sort of the next phase of their growth and maturity. But that's really hard to do. It's a really hard business.
It is a hard business. It's so funny. Even whenever we're talking right now, there's a couple of things that I identify with because there's so many of us that get into vet med. I was the same way. Like I think that I had all of these different thoughts of what direction I was going to go in my life. And then I got into vet med and I walked through the doors and I was like, oh, I'm not leaving, because you're surrounded by these people who are driven by this passion to just serve animals that, they can't talk. They can't pay. They can't do any of these things. Like, you're literally serving them because you love this. You have this passion to save these animals, right? And you get surrounded by that. And there's not many people that get around it that it doesn't impact in a way that you always want to have something to do with it and be some sort of part of it. And so I completely understand exactly how you could have just been exposed to it and then wanted to do something about it to flourish it and make it better and add to it. And right, even as you're saying these things like assets and equity and all of these words that are used, that's not something that I think was given as a tool to these veterinarians as they're graduating, because veterinarians, vet techs, anybody who walked through the doors, that's not necessarily lingo that they're given to understand what it means and what to do with it, right? We know that we're driven by our heart. We know that we're driven by this passion, but we don't always have that aspect of the business side or even the experience side of it. And I think it's really interesting that you came in and saw this entrepreneurial side of it. And even how long ago was this? Do you mind me asking that with that you had this experience?
The observations started, I would say, in 2016, 2017. And in 2018, that was really the year where it was hard to sort of unsee sort of the opportunity and to turn away from it. By the end of the year, we started the company. I think the idea of it's not just a training in the industry. I think a lot of people talk about, hey, let's go to veterinary schools and teach veterinarians how to be business owners. I don't know if that's the big gap. I think that in some ways there's this gap just between, in some ways, how good of a business it is or was, and there's some question of how is it evolving, and the incredible unobstructed just passion that drives people into this profession in the first place. And it's sort of like the gap between those two has led to sort of this like dissonance. And I do think that there is a normalization that has to happen of sort of people in the veterinary industry need to understand the people who are in the profession. If you're a veterinarian, if you're a technician, understanding the business better is probably good for you. And for sure, if you are involved in the business of veterinary medicine, understanding the people better is obviously good for you. I think as we think about, when we started, as an entrepreneur solving a problem, you are driven. I remember when I started Whistle, there was this bar, and it was not a high enough bar, but it was a bar of sort of, is this an idea you want to go build for at least 5 years? Because you're sort of locked in. Even if you start a company and even if you fail, you're probably still, if you do it for a year and you sort of give up on it because you don't really get much traction at all in terms of even starting the company, fine, maybe that's a year. But otherwise, if you raise any capital from anybody, if you hire anybody, you're probably doing that for at least 3, probably 4 or 5 years. And that's if you're trying to basically get out of it because it's not working. If it starts to work at all, you're in this thing for a really long time. And so what makes, I think, entrepreneurs unique in this country, really, I think this country is an incredibly unique place to build anything. And that's why I think it's such a unique place. You are committing for a much longer time frame, and therefore the intention that you set at the beginning has to be rooted in something much deeper than a quick buck or an arbitrage opportunity. So, when we started Whistle, it was 5+ years, and that was mostly me saying, I'm in my 20s, I'm motivated. Sure, 5 years is fine. When I started Modern Animal, the bar for me was like, this needs to be a good enough idea for me to pursue that I do nothing else after this. Like, this is the last thing I ever do. And whether that is or is not how things will play out, I have no idea. But that's my intent, and that was my intent when I started, because I think the way you solve really hard problems is you pour yourself into it. and you actually care at a much deeper level and you take a much longer term view on it. That just isn't true of all these consolidators in this industry. And when we, then we'll get into sort of the corporate veterinary medicine thing. But that is how veterinarians started their practices. That's how veterinarians begin their careers. That's what's so heartbreaking about the disillusionment when a veterinarian goes into practice for a few years and then leaves. Like, most of them have spent most of their lives, at least their adult lives, if not childhood through adult life, planning on this career, and then they go and they practice for a couple of years and they're burnt out. So I don't know if you need much more than that as an entrepreneur to be motivated to go solve this problem. I think you need a unique insight, and you need some level of actual access to the people, the context, because otherwise it looks probably like and this is what's happened. It looks shiny enough as everyone's gotten pets during COVID, or even before that, this industry is attracting so much capital. Like, this seems like a good business. I mean, I had another entrepreneur who started a similar concept to us sort of early on, would say to me, well, it's at the end of the day, it's just a good business. It's like, I would never say that. Like,
right.
That's a prerequisite to go build a business, but it's not like the reason. It's like, at the end of the day, if it's hard, well, at least it's a good business. No, like, at the end of the day, it needs to be like, this is a problem really worth solving. Like,
right. Well, and you can feel whenever people are in it for the wrong reasons, right? And so it's almost like you have to be driven by the right reasons, specifically in this profession. And I really appreciate your take on that, because even as you're saying it, right, like, I'm putting myself in the shoes of my team that I would oversee. We do need to be focused on not only taking care of ourselves, taking care of our team members, but ultimately taking care of the pets too. And when all of those things are at play, to have to also know so many different things about the business side of it or the entrepreneurial side of it, that takes away from you being able to focus in that area. And so all of a sudden, now not only are you burning at both ends of the stick, but you're having to spread your time so across so many different areas, that I really have an appreciation of how you kind of brought that up and worded it in the way of like you saw this problem, you wanted to solve it, and like, you're working on solving that problem in the background while the team is doing what they love with this passion that they've been drawn to. And it also helps take some of the relief off. When it's being done right, it helps take some of the relief off, right? When it's being done wrong, and I think some of this conversation will continue into what that looks like, but when it's being done wrong, it adds to the problem. And so I think that's a great viewpoint that you just gave, and I really appreciate you expressing it that way. I had, even speaking of things that take away from our experience in clinic, I have a good friend of mine, Paul Diaz. I was having a conversation with him, and I know that this is somebody that you know as well. Paul and I, we linked up because our passions match each other, right? Like, we're fighting for the same thing. We want the same thing. We want to uplift and give a platform for these professionals in a way that they feel seen and taken care of, right? And part of our conversation, his biggest objective is non-competes. And I think a lot of times that's one of those problems that doctors don't even realize our problem until they're facing it, right? And that's, again, one of those things that they shouldn't have to worry about. And Paul really gave y'all a special shout out, and because y'all are a company that from the beginning, if I'm not correct, and I'll have you verify this, from the beginning, did you decide that non-competes were kind of be on your list of things?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, the conversation we were having just a minute ago, I think Paul is a great example of someone who, like me, has not worked in a veterinary practice, but is someone who is just the way he is fueled by not just like doing the right thing, but just someone who's fueled by passion, like someone who is fueled by, he gets energy out of serving and leading and breaking down sort of things that just don't make sense, and I feed off of that energy from him. And I think he's committed a tremendous amount of energy towards this thing that it's just going to happen, and like, it makes no sense that non-competes exist. If you look at the problem from any human lens, I mean, it makes sense from a protecting the asset perspective, and that's really it. But at the end of the day, what are we protecting? We're protecting yet another incentive for more roll-ups, and I don't know that that's necessarily good. The promise of professionalization of the veterinary profession has not happened with consolidation. So, yeah, I mean, our story there is really simple, and I'll be really honest. One, we're in California. That's where we started. Non-competes are illegal in California. So it wasn't even a question. Second of all, even if we were not in California, the advantage we have is we're building from scratch. So we would never have put them in place if the whole point of the company was to build a place that's better for people. Having them stick around just because of a contract, it just like goes against every reason we started this thing. So now, if I put myself in the shoes of a consolidator, for sure, you're buying these clinics. The day that deal closes, people are probably like, okay, well, I don't know if I really want to be here. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe the veterinarian who I came to practice with is retiring. He or she is leaving. What's keeping them there when there's tremendous demand and interest for for veterinarians across the whole country? And maybe that's eased a little bit, but we still have a shortage. So sure, it makes sense, right? But it's really a very weak position to take, which is saying we can't guarantee that we're going to be a better place for you to work, so we're going to legally force you to be here. I mean, it's basically a form of indentured servitude. I mean, it's just kind of reprehensible. So I don't know how anyone would do anything otherwise if you were starting from scratch. So it's going to go away. I think the New York governor vetoing the ban there, there's some specific nuance there with like the financial services industry in New York, and that's just a very different thing. And even then, I think that the carve-outs that they're trying to propose there would allow for the veterinary industry to sort of move forward with not allowing bans in New York State. So I think it's going to happen. I think it's not going to just happen because we all wake up one day. It's going to happen because of people like Paul pushing for it. It's going to happen because of veterinarians raising their hand and saying, I'm not going to sign up for this. It's just not necessary to actually create a better environment. And that's all the things that prevent us from progress around actually solving customer pain points. And in our minds, we always think about customers for us are the veterinarian, the technician, as well as the pet owner. So for us, a non-compete is just a really bad excuse to not actually put in the effort to make something about it, do the work.
Right.
And have a free market. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like I'm a very, my family immigrated from the Soviet Union. I'm the first generation. My parents were entrepreneurs. My uncle's an entrepreneur. My father-in-law is an entrepreneur. My wife's also, family's also from the Soviet Union. This country is a very special place. And I said that earlier. Non-competes are kind of go against every part of that. I mean, at the end of the day, free market, competition. If you're a veterinarian and you own your own practice and there's another veterinarian down the street, whoever practiced better medicine, whoever delivered better customer service, whoever delivered a better place for a veterinarian to come and start their career, for a technician to come and work, won, and non-competes are effectively preventing that. I mean, it's heartbreaking when we have a veterinarian, a candidate that we're talking to, and they're excited, we send the offer to them, and then they come back to us and say, I just read my contract and I have a non-compete. It's like, just think about what that looks like. That whole situation, this person is looking for their job. They went through the interview process. They're excited. And then they go back and look at like a short document that they signed years ago, and they can't practice within some reasonable radius of that practice. And so they're now either stuck there, they have to move their family. We have to figure out some fancy way where they come work at one of our other practices that's super inconvenient for them with a longer commute for long enough to be outside of that. I mean, it's just a mess.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, and I got vulnerable with Paul on this. I worked for a practice. I ran a practice. We required non-competes, right? We were private practice. And for me, I didn't know any better, right? And for me, the statement that I used when I started having the conversation around non-competes is, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I'm a firm believer that there's a large portion of what we struggle with in vet medicine because we say the statement, that's the way we've always done it, right? And anytime I use those words, I want to seek to understand. I want to be curious about it. And so having that conversation with Paul, it really opened my eyes of like, yeah, why did we do that? What is that necessity? It does come out of neediness. And do you ever flourish when you come from a place of neediness, right? Like, it's so funny. I was just having a conversation about want versus need because I want to show up here. I don't want to be here because I have to be here, right? Like, and to be able to have a space where people want to show up every day, I think that's really important. And to back that up with the confidence of like, there's non-competes are not even on the list. I think that's a huge thing, you know? And it kind of even plays a little bit, Stephen, into the next part of this conversation.
Can I just say one last thing on that?
Oh my gosh, please. Always.
Can I just like look at the camera and say like, just stop doing it. Like to everyone, stop doing non-competes, stop signing them. If you're looking for a job, they make no sense. We've got to move on.
Right.
Like even this topic is almost boring to me because it's so painfully obvious. If you can't accept it at this point, it's just one more thing that's going to ensure that you lose.
Right. And also it's still super prevalent, right? Like
it's crazy.
So I'm from Texas. It's a super prevalent thing, right? And I agree with you. Like there's so many other, which leads into this next part of this conversation, right? Like there's so many bigger issues in vet med that we want to try and help heal and shed light on.
Totally. And that's why I'm like, let's move on from it almost.
And like that, it shouldn't even be, but it is definitely something that is worthy of conversation because I think you have a unique experience with being from California, right? Like,
well, and it's just, if you are starting something, if you are going to try to do something different, it would never be one of the features. You wouldn't say, hey, here's our list of things we want to do differently. Let's actually keep non-competes. And I will say we try to change a lot of things, and a lot of those things are the way they are for a reason. And we've had to actually go back and say, oh, you know what? We tried to innovate on this thing and we kind of broke the thing. So let's go back because it turns out that many years of veterinarians and technicians practicing medicine has resulted in this is how they do it, and it actually is better. But this is not one of those things.
Well, so then that kind of leads into the next aspect of the conversation. Like with some of the struggles that we have, what are some of those focuses that you have with Modern Animal, with veterinary professionals specifically, with who's in your clinics running them right now? Like what, I hate to say problems because I believe that like when we use these words of like burnout and compassion fatigue and issues and broken and this cloud and all of these things, I think it's this world that we're creating around us. The words we use is like the world that we're building, right? And so I hate saying it like that, but there is things that need to be fixed, right? And so what focuses do you and Modern Animal have specifically around some of our biggest challenges?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, the root cause of a lot of the problems are people related. So I think first, like that's where you got to focus. And there's a whole bunch of things within that. I think first of all, like what do people spend time on, and where is that time being spent on serving patients, communicating with clients, or is it being spent on other stuff? So we focus partially on, how do we eliminate some of that stuff? And I think technology has a really interesting role to play there. I think AI has a really interesting role to play there. So I think there's a lot of exciting momentum that is happening in the industry, because I think artificial intelligence, while scary in some ways, is actually extremely relevant to healthcare, not just veterinary medicine, because we actually can use data and have a computer tell us or support us or automate things to free up a team's time to actually help more patients, alleviate some of the shortage, and ultimately get home on time. So that's a big one. I mean, first of all, like we want our doctors home on time. It's funny, we got better at getting them home on time, and then we started to focus on more comprehensive preventative care and sort of being more diligent and disciplined on that. It resulted in a whole bunch more lab reporting, and so now we sort of have gone back to doctors going home later than we wanted. So that's like huge priority for us, is we got to simplify the workflow, automate a bunch of stuff that's not why a veterinarian went into practice in the first place or why a technician's there.
And a lot of us are stubborn and don't want to learn like new things. Like it's hard breaking through on some of these technicians and these veterinarians.
We're gonna have to. So, but I will say that one thing that's been awesome, sort of building this team, has been we self-select. I mean, people self-select to come to Modern Animal who are excited about that change. I mean, very few people come to Modern Animal. There's that instinct of like, ooh, this is different than what I was used to. But most people join us because they're excited to see that change. In terms of other things, I mean, a lot of my own learnings, even on our own journey, have been, we started building a lot of things for pet owners early on, just because it was, a business without clients. How are we going to start from zero and have clients come? And I've heard a lot of people who are starting to build de novo practices come to us and say, how do you guys scale these things? Because we're getting very few clients, early, and they're not building a brand. They're not building a marketing muscle, which you have to do. But they also haven't necessarily built a better experience for clients. And so why would people switch? So I think in our case, we had to start there. But the much harder work is really, what are we going to change for the team? And there's no silver bullet. It's a whole bunch of small stuff. It's everything from like practice culture. The biggest things are, leadership. How do you do training, upskilling? I mean, even going all, if you just think about we talk about like user journeys when you build consumer products or, mobile apps or anything kind of in technology. The same is true of a veterinary practice. You think about, you have a pet owner who comes in for an appointment. Like, what's the end-to-end user journey that they're going through? What's the end-to-end user journey of a technician when they clock in the morning and when they clock out at night? And there's a whole bunch of stuff along the way that can be improved. So everything from, how do we recruit? I think we've made a lot of mistakes in hiring, and whether that be not hiring the right people, whether that be hiring people with the wrong expectations, not delivering on our own promise that we've made to them because we're not there yet. So how do we improve that process so that there's no sense of this like bait and switch, or you told me one thing. So that's hard, because we have a big vision. We're working on improving things. Sometimes we fix something and we break something while we fix a different thing, So there's communicating more clearly there. There's the onboarding process, and how do you make that consistent? I mean, how many folks in the industry have I heard, have really bad onboarding experiences, or getting lucky. Like, I had a great mentor, I got lucky. There's like a statement a lot of times in this profession. It's like, I got lucky, I had this amazing mentor in my old practice. Why is that luck sort of that's determining whether you will or will not be successful as a veterinarian, So I think a lot of making that consistent and scalable, and a lot of the things for us, we want to have impact at scale. That's not every entrepreneur in this industry's job necessarily, is not to have impact at scale. Like, you can own one practice and have a tremendous impact and inspire that team, and then those people will go off and sort of help drive change. But our goal has from the beginning been, let's do it at scale. So how do we do onboarding at scale, where it's you are really clear on the responsibilities. I think earlier on, my goal was, let's just make it a lot easier for people in the industry. And I don't think that's right. I think we all thrive in challenging environments, but how do we support them? So it became less about make it all easier. We have to create work-life balance for people, but it's not necessarily about making it easier. It's about giving them the tools, the support that they need to achieve their goals, to achieve the goals of the practice, and then actually empowering more at the clinic level. That was a huge miss, quite frankly, on my part. You kind of referenced this earlier, but a lot of what I wanted to do when we started the business was I kind of overly idealized probably the veterinarian and the technician and sort of the practice of medicine, and said, everything that's not medicine, let's automate or centralize, get it out of the practice. It's a waste of time, right? Let's have them focus on medicine. That's what they're there to do. I actually think we kind of neutered our team a little bit, where we disempowered them. And I don't think we need to be doing like business school classes for our veterinarians. That's not a great use of their time, and that's not why they're in the industry. But I think removing a lot of the stuff we removed was actually probably doing them a disservice. We actually added steps to just communicating with the client, to providing, end-to-end care. So there's certain things where I think we went too far, and now we've had to sort of bring that back in. But my point is mostly that we realized that, getting people set up for success with the right support and the right tools to actually push through challenges and grow. I mean, a little bit of kind of your take on moving on a little bit from the victim mindset, moving on a little bit from, this is all happening to us, it's all corporate's fault. The reality is, clients are difficult. Their demands have gone up, right? We talk about, all of the boom of pet ownership and younger pet owners, and well, their expectations have gone up. And that's true of every business. Customers have gotten more demanding. Things have gotten more transparent. A lot of things, the reality is in the veterinary practice, a lot of things you can kind of get away with a lot from a service perspective, perhaps because clients didn't expect it back then, or didn't have to over communicate. Now you do. So anyway, with us, a lot of the problems stem from great leadership, or the things we're trying to solve are, how do we put great leadership in place? How do we develop great leaders for people who want to raise their hand and say, I want to be a leader one day? This industry has done an abysmal job of creating a real pipeline of leaders.
There's many things that I think, and I speak from not only my own experience, but from the experience that I feel and see and hear every single day, like especially with support staff, right? Like there's this ceiling effect of where do you go from here, right? And if there's not a clear path of growth, like us as humans, we always want to be growing, right? So if there's not this clear path of growth, well, that goes for veterinarians too, right? Like I know they love practicing medicine, or else they wouldn't be in it. But when you stay stagnant for so long and there's no area for growth, that becomes a problem in itself, right? And I think there's a couple of things that you just talked about that is worth highlighting or circling back to. One, your vulnerability and your ability to really recognize where you've fallen short and say it out loud. I think that's a big deal, because there's not many people that would not only recognize it, but sit so comfortably in saying it out loud. And I think that whenever you're willing to say it, recognize it, and work on it, I think that's where magic really starts to happen.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people have a hard time with that?
With saying that they're wrong, because I think their ego gets in the way, right? Like, and if your ego gets in the way and you're not willing to be that person, then how do you expect someone else, in my own personal opinion, right? Like, how do you expect someone else to do it? If I work for a doctor that makes a mistake and then hides that mistake, is not honest about it, whether it's with a client, with another doctor, with the technician they're working with, right? Is that the example that you're setting, right? And if that's the case, then when I make a mistake, is it my job to then hide it, right? Well, who's getting the disservice at that point? Not only my team, not only my doctor, but ultimately that patient. So everybody's losing, including myself. And I believe that when you recognize it and you say it, that's you like setting your stake, like, I'm going to do better and I'm going to get better because the people I'm doing for is what it matters for. Like, the pets is what it matters for. It's not about me or my ego. And I think that's
actually, there's something really powerful about this profession that ties to that. Like, veterinarians are seeking truth about the animal and the patient, right? And there's nothing getting in the way of that usually, right? Until you get to the client. There's no, like, there's not some other ego on the other side of sort of the work you're doing, right? If you're a human doctor, I imagine that ego comes up a lot, right? If you want to tell your patient to do something differently, and whether they do or don't listen. So I think in some ways, I wonder if deep down there's some draw that I had, because I'm ultimately a truth seeker. And so for me, it's very easy to say where we're wrong. I may not know that we're wrong, and that's where I rely on the team. I rely on going into the clinics and shadowing. We do a ton of surveying. We do a ton of like roundtable feedback type discussions. I get dinner or lunch with a lot of our team to hear firsthand. And it's hard because it requires you to look in and come to terms with the fact that you may have been wrong. It's interesting, like we've been building the company for 5 years, and I used to be very obsessed with being right. Now, not convinced I was right, but I wanted to just be right. And it was kind of getting in the way. So I'm kind of done with that. There's been very little value of me trying to be right. I think the only value has come from getting to the answer that is sort of the truth. And sometimes the truth is the way the industry did it before is better. Sometimes the truth is we don't know the answer yet. And sometimes the truth is like the exact opposite of the thing that we did. And so now we have to pivot completely. But I do wonder to what degree veterinarians, as ultimately truth seekers about, the medical issue at hand, is partially why I'm here.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even when you talk about like AI, right? So with me, when I think, I worked for a big company that introduced an instrument that was AI driven. And when I started to hear about it, I bristled up, right? Well, why did I bristle? Because had it been me in clinic and they would have come in and said, we're bringing in this instrument, it's going to do these things for you, I would have bristled, because I would have had that fear of irrelevance, right? I'm not needed.
Yeah.
And if you're not needed, why are they going to keep me here? And what's going to keep me from not, when really, ultimately what that made it capable of is like, I was able to step away from this specific job that I was doing that wasn't even what I was really there for in the first place, right? Like, I was there to take care of the pets. I was there to make connection with the clients. I was there to build up this bond and this trust, right? It had nothing to do with that specific instrument. But when you feel that fear of like irrelevance, like, that's a big deal. And I think that even goes back to what we're talking about right now, is like, when you're truth seekers, or whenever you're in this space of like wanting to always grow or learn more, there's that thought process of like, oh, well, what if this prevents that? Or like, what if this makes me where I'm not? And so even that aspect of recognizing that's huge for you to be leading this company, and for that to be your outlook on it, right? And that it kind of, Stephen, it's funny because even that portion of this conversation leads into kind of as we start to wrap up this conversation, you gave me the permission to kind of ask questions and to have that freedom. And as somebody who was in clinic in the time frame when all of these corporate companies started to come in and consolidate and all of that, there is this thought that the corporate world is the big bad wolf, right? And my question is what about modern animal is different or stands out, or almost, I guess the way I think maybe the way I'm looking at it is like, what makes it a draw for people to come to and work for, even with it being within this corporate realm? Do I make sense when I ask it that way? Okay.
Yeah. I think it's worth sort of describing what's happened in the industry first, and then why we think we're different. So the industry about 30 years ago, a little more than that now, 35 years ago probably, started being consolidated. And really over the last decade, and a lot of that fueled by low interest rates and availability of debt and just rising, the market sort of growing, not just veterinary medicine, but just the stock market and the overall economy booming, really from like 2010 on, the consolidation went crazy. And so what's interesting about it is that very few people know about it. Most of these consolidators are some 3-letter acronym that don't rebrand their clinics. So after Banfield and VCA, they've all kind of been unbranded for the most part. And the mantra, and in some cases their mission, was effectively, join us, stay you, like basically euphemism for, we're not going to do anything. Sell yourself to us. And that has played out where now, X number of years later, when all those veterinarians have left who sold their practice, who were the heart and soul of their practice, we're left with these kind of abandoned shells of what they were. And a lot of people disillusioned. And what has also happened around the time when we started was other people started getting a sense of, well, if we can't, so basically in 2021, the market hit its peak, and we've been sort of in this much slower, I think we had like 1,500 hospitals were acquired in 2021, and I think it went down to about 500 last year. So we're down by 2/3, and maybe we're at the bottom, maybe it'll start increasing again, but at some point we will run out of great practices to consolidate, although we still have very many left. So others started getting the idea that maybe we should start new practices. And I don't want to take credit, whether it's us or a few other companies, but generally people got the idea that maybe we should build new practices. And some have said, we're going to do it in an unbranded way because that's what we know. And others have said, well, if you're going to do it from scratch, build a brand. And now that's become a much more visible thing, new practices that are opening and they're a little shiny, and then people are seeing through that and saying, oh, these are actually the same. It's just a shiny sort of new sign on it. So a couple things. One, consolidation, is the vast majority of what's corporate. But the corporate sort of theme is not going away. Like once that happens, it's not going to go back, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And there are some amazing independent veterinarian entrepreneurs who are building great practices. But again, how do we, I don't want to say fight to your point earlier,
right?
Not fight against, but how do we keep up with the pace at which this has all happened if we want to show that there's a different path, there's a different way to do it, there's a better approach? Well, we kind of have to do it at scale. And all corporate means is that there's just like a bigger entity behind something, and it's kind of being more professionalized, and that's necessary if we want to show a different path. So we kind of have a choice, and this is a choice for us all as part of this industry. We can either say all corporate bad, and let's all try to either romanticize or go back to the good old days. Those days are gone, and the situation is different. The cost of schooling, the cost of actually building a practice, the cost of competing in this marketplace. We can lament, $100,000 sign-on bonuses that, some of the worst companies are doing because they're most desperate. But you kind of have to now compete with that. I mean, we can lament it all we want, but at the end of the day, if you want Are you going to tell a veterinarian who's got an offer from there, no, come here with no sign-on bonus? Well, some people might say, well, I have $300,000 of debt. Like, that's a really big deal. I'm going to go suffer, for a few years and then I'll come join. So there's going to be I think it's a little bit kind of like the non-compete discussion. We just have to show that there's a better path. And I don't think that just saying corporate is bad is good enough, And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here as Modern Animal. I think that my whole approach here has been, we're not going to go backwards in time. So if we're going forwards, let's just show a better path. And it doesn't mean that we're perfect and that we figured it all out. I guarantee you, if you come work at Modern Animal and you came from a great independent practice and you loved it, and then, got bought and then it went sideways, and then you come here, we'll probably have a bunch of things that you're going to say are worse, because we're only 5 years in and we're moving fast. We're trying to do a lot of things right, and we do some things wrong. But what's different about us is that we really give a damn.
Right.
We really, really care. And there is no ulterior motive here. We are trying to build a big business because a big business allows us to do this at scale. It allows us to keep growing, to build clinics, to have a lot of employees, to have a lot of clients, and to just do the thing that we believe is better and different more times. At the end of the day, we've raised private capital. Anyone who has built, more than a practice or two there are some exceptions where they've gone slower and they've been able to grow from their own profit, but they still also had to focus on profit to grow. So unless you're a nonprofit, or you are an independent owner and you really don't care about trying to grow the thing, you're going to have to probably have capital. And one, there's differences in type of capital, and there's also differences in when that capital comes in. What are they signing up for? I regularly would talk to investors when we would raise money and say the mission is really important. It's really genuine. It's not just those things. It's also the strategy. Like, it's very simple. We want to win. We're competitive. We want to be the best. And the way we just believe we're going to be the best is by being the best place to work. That's a specific point of view. That may not be everyone's point of view. It may also be wrong. I don't think it'll be wrong, but it may mean that we overinvest in training and leadership development and tools and, making sure people have a work-life balance. Again, none of those things I think we've necessarily nailed yet, but we're investing in all those things. Those are our biggest priorities for the company. And I think if we do that, we win, because we will be the place that every veterinarian will want to go and that every technician will want to go, with the exception of maybe certain others, whether it's because you don't live where we are or because you really want to own your own practice, which I highly encourage for anybody who's entrepreneurial. But I think that there's a strategic choice that we have simply made. And it is something that everyone who has invested in the company has bought in on. Nobody is pushing me ever. I just had a board meeting on Friday. Not at any point did anyone say, I'd really prefer that we squeeze some more profit versus invest in that thing. Now, we have to ourselves say, hey, we have to sort of decrease investment in this thing because we know it's not sustainable. Our investors don't know that necessarily. They're not as close to it. They trust us. They trust the mission. They trust the strategy. And that's what people have invested in. Now, the type of capital matters too. We have long-term investors. We have venture capital investors. A lot of people are smashing these terms together right now in the industry: venture capital, private equity. These are very different things. Venture capital has usually a 10-year life on the investment, or kind of they look out 10 years. Their ultimate goal is for a company to go public, be an independent company. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Hopefully, then the company sells and it's a good outcome for people as an investor. But our goal is very clear. Our goal is to be an independent long-term company. And because that's, I think, the best way for us to achieve the goal of being the best. If you raise capital from private equity, they want to hand this thing off to the next person in 3 to 5 years. And that's just not enough time. There have been multiple de novo platforms in the industry that have started with private equity, and I kind of saw that train wreck happening, and it has happened. They've traded, the CEOs have been fired. Not to sound like some all power wielding authoritarian leader here, but I am sort of at the helm of this thing, for better for worse, for our investors, and they know that, in the sense that they are signing up to do this with me, not me as CEO, but me as sort of at the heart. And you're going to spend time with Dr. Long too, with her and others who started this thing. We are not hired guns. We're not jumping from this job to some other job. This is the thing we want to put into the world, and that really matters. So I say all of this stuff to just say, you have to give a damn, and that's the biggest difference. And so it's not the name or whatever's on the website. It's just the people behind it, like anything. I mean, if you think about private practice, the difference between two private practices, there were substantial differences. Was the owner, the chief of staff, the medical director, whatever it was, did they really care? Did they put their heart and soul into it? If not, it wasn't going to be great just because it was a private practice. It's kind of the same thing.
Right.
We see more people who really, really care.
Well, and I think there's a couple things that you highlighted, and I think it goes back to transparency, clear as kind, right? Like, it takes money to run a business, and to get that money, like, there's certain things that have to happen, right? Like we have to see those appointments, and we have to do these things, right? But is it for a bigger goal that we're committed to? Is it for something that we're all moving in the same direction for? Is the light at the end of the tunnel worth moving towards, right? And to me, it sounds like you're setting it up in a way of, like, you want them to move towards that light, and that you're giving anybody within Modern Animal the opportunity to stand with the same mission and the same passion, right? And to be able to do that, like, sometimes you have to have more of this backing and more of the ability to take it to the best, or to spread it and make the most impact, right? And I think it's really awesome that you're willing to be clear about that. Like, it's not about the fact that you're not going to do it, because that's the direction that you're on. It's just a matter of how are you going to do it, and are you going to do it the right way? And it sounds to me that you're committed to doing it the right way. And I also agree with the consolidation versus corporate versus private practice, right? Like, you're going to practice medicine. It's just a matter of, like, where do you feel the most comfortable, and is it all for the right reasons that sit well with you? And if that's Modern Animal, like, you're welcome to be here with us, because this is the direction we're moving, and we're doing it because we believe in it. And I think there's a lot of power behind that. And I think that it's a perfect way for us to even kind of wrap this conversation up of, like, you really do seem like you're doing it for the right reasons. You really do seem like you're pushing to make the impact in this profession that we were all started out to do it for too, which is to save as many pets as possible and to help as many people as possible. And to be able to do that, you have to have the kind of the backing for that. Like, you can make your impact in a smaller private practice if you want, or you can sit with us on our side and make the impact in a bigger way, as far as how vast and how wide you're reaching. And I think that's pretty amazing. So
yeah, and I think for me that was just the journey that I was on. I think that was, the impact wasn't going to come from me going to vet school and becoming a veterinarian. I mean, that was sort of where I was in my life when I came across sort of all this. Was I was already an entrepreneur. I had a deep network of investors who believed in me, and I had stumbled across this, as a place that I was spending time, and had fallen in love with the people in it. And that was sort of like anything in life, if you want to explain how you got there, it's sort of usually a winding road.
Mm-hmm.
They got you there. And so it kind of doesn't matter, you
Right.
know, there's not some like greater purpose to all of this other than just sort of like, putting your best foot forward and if you get purpose out of hard work and solving problems, then as long as you're doing that authentically, then you're going to sort of, I think, create good in the world. And I think that's just where this is. So I think when people question sort of the motives, I think sometimes, whether it's, for example, last year, we had not focused on profit at all. And it was a little bit too idealistic. And I wanted to, like I said, protect our clinics and the team from it. But at some point, we just weren't making money. So, we were making all these investments. We were never going to pay back those investments. And so we had to start focusing on it. We went probably a little too far. We talked about it a little too much. So we try to put a framework in place called our 4 commitments, where we talk about medical quality and our member experience and our team's engagement and profitable growth. And we talk about them, how are they in balance? We're not chasing any one of them to like the end of the earth. We're just saying that they all have to be in balance. And we track them. And if something's out of whack, then we have to focus on it. And the reality is profitable growth, which is sort of, we want to grow. We need to be profitable to grow. There are certain levels of profit that sort of sustain the business. If we make an investment in a clinic, say it costs $1 million to build a clinic, how fast do we pay that back, and over how long of a period of time? Because if it takes way too long, no one's going to ever give us more money to keep doing this, or we won't earn enough money ourselves to grow that faster than a snail's pace. So we had to talk about it, but all of it's in balance like anything. And I think our teams are learning that just is part of the reality, that this is not a utopia where we aren't going to talk about this stuff. but I got some great feedback from our team where they said, hey, I think we just started talking about this way too much. And I think we've lost track of why we're here. And so that was a really big wake-up call for me. And it said, okay, you're right. Like, we have got to shift focus back to, like, we've made way too many things too complicated. And so even if you were inside the company and looking at our priorities for this year, they're all focused internally on, simplifying the, workflow for our teams, building better software on top of the software that we've already built, automating a lot of things that are just a waste of people's time, really investing in upskilling, really investing in leadership development, and continuing to build a great experience for everything from recruiting to onboarding and onwards. So it's a balance. And I think our team's feedback is now it's no longer just, me and a few of us, started this thing, our ideas on the whiteboard. It's really just being as close to our customer, which is our team, as possible. And they tell us.
Yeah, it's important. Our need to be heard as humans is massive. And that is definitely present in our professional lives and our work lives. So to have a highlight on that is really important. And what a great way to end our conversation today, because it's like you're sticking your foot in the ground and really standing your ground with that. And I think that's really impressive. And Stephen, I don't typically ever wrap up a conversation without showing my gratitude to the dedication for this profession. And that's not going to be any different here. My gratitude always sits whenever I know that somebody's adding to the beautiful aspect of what we do this for, to the beautiful aspect of veterinary medicine in general. And I believe that you have a genuine interest in doing that. And I'm grateful for that. Thank you for your dedication to not only recognizing when things aren't going right, but being willing to be honest about it, be vulnerable, to turn inward and work on it, and to do it not because that's what everybody says that you should do, but to do it because the people matter and because you have a vision of making massive impact in the veterinary space. And I think that speaks volumes for who you are as a leader and for what Modern Animal is doing in this space. And so I'm very grateful, and I'm grateful for this conversation.
Thank you for inviting a conversation that's trying to be more positive and looking at how we actually solve some of these things versus just complaining about them and lamenting them, because it's unfortunately that won't solve them.
I'm optimistic that we're on the right path for sure.
I think so too.
So thank you very much.